co-host today. Hello, Mr. Kevin Couling. How are you?
Hey, I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me along.
So, Kev, you know that I've recruited you today for a multitude of reasons, not only your expertise, but Andrew is sick.
I know.
He's beat up, he's under the weather, he's all the things. So instead of listening to him complain, I thought we could just have a great conversation, the two of us.
Great idea. What a great idea.
There you go. So I know I'm not as well versed in climate change, in COP29, in all the things that you all are, and that we maybe as American associations are a little more behind on
Okay.
than EU organizations or even UK organizations. But we've chatted before. You're a return association transformation guest. So now as a co-host, what's going on? What do our listeners need to know, and what's next for coming out of COP29, but also what's coming down the pipe?
Well, I mean, the COP happens every year, doesn't it? And this is, as you say, the 29th one. They started back in 1995. And I think practitioners in the field feel pretty disappointed with recent COPs. And COP29 was no exception, to be perfectly honest. It was headlined as the finance COP, the COP that was going to sort out things like developed nations m sort of contributing to and supporting developing nations, and those vulnerable nations to transition to a better place. But things, yeah, there was progress made for sure. There was definitely progress made, but overall, it was a disappointing outcome, if I'm really honest. So,
Well,
I mean, go ahead.
I'm always thrown off, number one, by the number, because it's not the year, it's the number of COPs that
Correct.
happen. So I'm always
That's
thrown
right.
off by that. And I'll admit, we don't get the same amount of coverage of it here in the
Sure.
United States, or at least in kind of the channels of news that I think the average listener consumes. When is the 2025 COP? What would that be? COP 30?
Yep. That'll be COP30. Yep. It'll be later in the
When
year.
is
I
that
think around
scheduled?
November time, I think.
Okay.
I don't know exactly. But yeah, November time. Um, and there were some big things hoping to be agreed at this COP, not least this kind of funding agreement that developing nations would support other nations. And the idea was that previously, 5 years ago, it was agreed that it would be 100 billion US per year for developing nations, which is sounds a lot of money, but it's actually not very much in the grand scheme of things.
From all
Yeah,
developing
well,
nations
for well,
cumulatively?
f- mm, yeah, well, I wouldn't necessarily say all developing nations, but yeah, those ones who had kind of signed up to it, yes, that was what would happen.
Okay.
This time they agreed a tripling of that to 300 billion, which is great. That's fantastic. Unfortunately, what's required is about 1.3 trillion. So it's still a ways off. So that
Yeah.
that was not great, and the detail of exactly how that money is measured doesn't get sorted out until the Standing Committee on Finance meets in 2028.
Oh,
So
wow. Okay.
things take a long time to process, things take a long time to get agreed, and the reality is that I mean, two of the delegations stormed out in protest because it was so that's not ideal. So anyway, there we go. So that wasn't good. Um, and then there was a piece of work on cutting emissions, of course. And at COP28 last year, they did what was called a global stock take, so kind of reviewing all the climate policies that were set out under the 2015 Paris Agreement to figure out where that stood. And there's things like tripling renewable energy generation by 2030 and transitioning away from fossil fuels in a fair manner and all that kind of stuff. And this COP in 29 was meant to launch something called the UAE dialogue to work out how to inform these new. I mean, it's so difficult not to get into jargon. By the way, when you talk about all
I
this stuff,
know.
it's just
Believe
it
me,
is
we
just
already
it's
we're all
rife with
about
it.
acronyms. We're
Uh,
already lost in
I,
the world of acronyms.
I
It's
know. I'm looking ahead in what I'm planning to say. I'm thinking there's at least five things I can't just say. Anyway, so what's meant to happen is regularly all the nations who are party to the conference have to report what they call these nationally determined contributions. So what are they going to do to support this move to a net zero kind of future? And the next ones are due in February next month. And this UAE dialogue was to work out how was to inform those new NDCs, but the reality is it failed. It failed to come to an agreement. So Saudi Arabia, in particular, refused to have any reference to fossil fuels in the text. I don't know how you can have
What?
something that I know. I don't know how you can have something that talks about cutting emissions and not have any reference to fossil fuels, but they refused to do that anyway. So that kind of went by the by. Um,
So this isn't just because of the new administration in the US. There are other challenges.
oh God, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yeah,
right, but
yeah.
we're not the
Well,
only problem.
no, right. I mean, I mean, even the fact that it was held in Baku, in Azerbaijan, where not over 90% of their export is fossil fuels,
Yeah.
and yeah, there was a lot of kind of muttering and grumbling about all that kind of stuff. So the finance COP didn't really. I mean, it was got better, but it was nowhere near what it should be. The cutting emissions kind of work stream that didn't go quite as well as we'd hoped. The Just Transition Work Program, those talks didn't conclude, so they'll have to carry on in June this
What
year.
does that mean? What
Just
does,
so if you like the US is a really good example, right? Loads of people in the US, their jobs rely on petrochemical industries of some description, and possibly even more now that the new administration is thinking of opening up some new gas fields and stuff, or whatever it is they're planning to do, drilling for oil or whatever. But the Just Transition Work Program is about recognizing that those people need some support. Like you can't just expect to stop their industry and not give them any support. So it's about helping them transition to new industries,
okay.
in renewable energy generation, whatever. So that didn't quite get as far as they'd hoped. So that's got to continue in June. The global goals on adaptation, so adapting to climate change, well, that lacks some consensus on the means of implementation. Um, so maybe that didn't go quite as well as they'd hoped. Carbon markets, there was an agreement on carbon markets. So after 10 years of negotiation, finally there are some guidelines approved which lay the foundations for a mechanism to develop and trade carbon credits. So even that, you can see it's kind of like it's not actually like hit the ground, the rubber is not yet on the tarmac. So nonetheless, that was progress. So that's good. And there's all this stuff that was hoped for and planned, but as has been the case with many recent COPs, it didn't really live up to its billing, unfortunately.
And
So
there's so many layers to this for our sector, for the nonprofit and
yeah,
association sector. I think of this as an example of a board or an organization trying to do all these things and not having the consensus or the buy-in and just kind of spinning its wheels.
yep,
I think about it as an association who would like to be a part of the solution and contribute to a net zero ecosystem. Um, if these are happening every year,
yep.
why do they happen every year?
I mean, maybe they think climate change is a big enough problem that they need to get together every
Yeah.
year. Maybe they
Well,
realize that they need to do that to actually drive some kind of action because it's kind of pretty slow.
but I think of like in terms of strategic planning, you don't plan every year because you need some time to do.
Yeah, right.
Um,
Yeah, right. I guess the things they're putting in place are pretty big. And if you agree something at a COP one year, you've then got to kind of translate that into kind of activity at a national level. So
yeah.
that all takes time, doesn't it? So there's only so much they can get through, I suppose, in a year because these things aren't necessarily quick, are they? But do you know what? The thing about COPs, I suppose, is that probably where a lot of the value comes from. And sure, you get big things like the Paris Agreement, that happened in 2015, and that's a really big thing. But a lot of the value, of course, is in all of the delegates that are there getting together, learning from each other, deriving
Sure.
value from that, and making connections, doing all that stuff. So that's really good. But from an association point of view, I would say if you're interested, have a look at the COP stuff, of course, keep your eye on it, understand the kind of direction of travel and the kind of stuff that could be coming down the track for sure. But even without the COPs, we already know the stuff that we need to focus on.
Yeah.
We already kind of know that. So I don't think we need to beat ourselves up too much that the global leaders can't quite get it together.
Well, let's not be shocked. I mean, let's
Right.
lower expectations and
Yeah.
increase aspirations of us
Uh-huh.
as a planet. I mean, are there people who are looking at I'm not going to say the failures of COP, but are there people looking at COP and what is yet to be tackled or accomplished or agreed to, and saying, here, let's do this bite size. Here's how we can do this in smaller increments at the ground floor, at the ground level.
Yeah, I think a useful thing to do. So let me give you the UK example. So maybe 10 or 15 years ago, if you wanted to talk about climate change and you wanted to talk about action on climate change, that conversation was very much being led by the government. So the government was actually pretty forward thinking for the time back then. Now, though, maybe it's changed. Maybe it's changing a little bit because we've had a recent change of administration in the UK, obviously. But certainly for many years recently, that the kind of tables have turned, and it's not government leading the conversation, it's industry leading the conversation. So whatever industry you're in, there are plenty of examples of organizations that are recognizing their kind of commercial advantage, if nothing else, of taking a leadership position in this space because their clients are demanding it, their investors are demanding it.
Yeah,
So certainly, we can think about the progress or not that is being made at COP, but those are largely kind of very large, broad governmental issues, and of course they'll have an impact when they come into play. Not least, I suppose. So on the one hand, one of the things that government does, of course, is creates legislation and regulation, and that's stuff you have to comply with, and we should see that as the minimum standard always. But at the same time, they may also be more ambitious in terms of their procurement. So both the US government and the UK government, of course, are huge um, clients for many, many organizations
yeah,
across many sectors. So that's an area where you might see some action. Individual government departments kind of taking action to implement things, maybe ahead of whatever it is that's agreed in COP potentially. But I think actually the real opportunity is kind of recognizing the commercial value to your clients
yeah.
of offering them something that they want. I mean, there are plenty of organizations out there who don't really care about climate change, sure, and I guess there are clients out there who also don't care about climate change. But if you want to be part of that conversation, there are plenty of people out there who want to buy whatever it is you're selling, knowing that it's doing
Yeah.
something positive for
And
the
that's,
climate.
the business case, the association business case
Yeah,
is very different than a consumer
of
or
course.
commercial based business case. And oftentimes, at least in the trade association space, our members are often much farther ahead, given the industries they're in, the regulations that they're under. They're much farther ahead than the association that serves them in the
Yeah,
climate discussion. So,
yeah,
and it's an intimidating area. So, as a nonprofit executive, as an association executive who can't maybe lead your members in a certain direction because they're already having to be there, or they're farther along or having to move more quickly than the association can, how do you take first steps to become literate and speak this language in a competent and professional manner?
yeah. That's a really good point, actually. You're right, of course. Some associations maybe will be lagging behind their members in terms of actually practice and putting this stuff into play. So yeah, be informed is kind of number one, really. You need to. Funny enough, Andrew and I had a conversation about this on my podcast, Carbon Clarity, where we
What?
talked
You didn't
about.
invite me?
I could do, but I haven't got enough
Yeah.
microphones. Bring your own. It's like a bring your own microphone party. But yeah,
Let's hold
let's
on.
do
Wait.
that.
I should bring my own microphone. Hold on. I've
There
got it
you
right here.
There you go. Wow, you suddenly it was like stereo. So yeah, be informed. That's the thing for sure. And you know, associations for a long time have been one of the places, at least, that their membership would go to help them think about new issues that they're wrestling with. Back in the day, that might be in health and safety, or it might be in some other, taxation issues or HR issues or
Yeah.
whatever it was. And climate change is no different, really. It's cross-cutting. It affects absolutely everybody.
Yeah.
So associations are really well placed to be providing that guidance and support to the members. To do that, they have to be informed. They definitely got to do that. I would say that one of the things they should think about is joining an organization like CAFA, Climate Action for Associations, CAFA. Um, Alison and the team over there have got really great resources, great guidance. They've got some training that you can access. That's a really great place to start. And there's any number of organizations out there offering training around climate change to make sure that you kind of you're familiar with the terminology and you understand the science, and you kind of got you can feel confident and comfortable when you're talking about these issues. But in terms of the specific things that associations can help their membership with,
Mhm.
so the focus on climate change for many years has been around what we call mitigation, which is kind of about reducing the amount of emissions that we put into the atmosphere,
Yeah.
like energy efficiency and changing to a electric vehicle instead of a gas vehicle or whatever, those sorts of things. But the flip side of that is something called adaptation, where we recognize, what, irrespective of whatever we do now with our emissions, the symptoms of climate change are going to get worse. They can become more frequent and more extreme before they start to get better. So helping memberships prepare themselves for those things, to adapt to those things, to recognize the risk and plan for it is something that associations could definitely be really well placed to do. So that is something that I reckon they should look at.
Well, and I like how you described, even the COP environment. It may not be a place where solutions are prescribed, but it's a place for collaboration. And we may never be ahead of or be prescribing the innovations as an association, but can we provide an environment where our members can discuss adaptations, discuss how, to your point, the outcomes that are already going to occur would affect our industries, our professions, our clients, and out into the larger space, because it may need to just start as a safe place, a safe conversation to not try to solve, but just try to wrap our heads around and understand what the financial impact or the industry impact will be. You have to make
Yeah.
people feel it first, right? You have to feel the
Yeah.
pain before
Yeah.
you are ready to tackle something that's so big.
That's right. I mean, I think in the case of adaptation, I think it's quite a new thing, and understanding what kinds of risks you might be facing is the first step. So associations don't need to provide a solution. And Andrew says in the conversation that we had, it's not for associations to solve any problem particularly. What they're there to do is to, as you say, provide the environment or maybe provide the
Yeah.
information or some guidance to help memberships figure out the solutions themselves, and of course
Yeah.
to things like share best practice and stuff between their members and things like that, for sure. So recognizing there's two kinds of risks around adaptation. There's one is the physical risks, so from acute or chronic climate issues, the chronic stuff will be kind of gradual rises in temperature or rising sea levels or whatever it might be, reduction in stocks of things like fish. Acute issues would be increased hurricanes or maybe exacerbation of wildfires and stuff, which obviously you guys have seen
Yeah.
in California recently. So physical risks are one thing, but there's also a load of risks around the transition to a um, to a net zero future. Things like market
Mhm.
risks and technology risks and reputational risks and all those things. So associations definitely arm themselves by being across all that stuff, and as you say, providing an environment where their membership can come together and help start to figure out the solutions to some of those challenges.
Yeah. And you may have heard we're a little divided in the United States. Politics are a little hairy and sticky and
Oh, I
something
hadn't seen
that
that.
you often want to avoid at the board table.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't want to presume that the US is taking the next 4 years off from caring about these things, but if you as an executive want to keep this on your list, on your whether you believe
Yep.
it or not, whether you prioritize it or not, it's part of the future trends. It's happening.
It-
It's an impact and you can't argue that. So what's that bite-sized safe thing that everyone agrees on? That, I mean, is this about business travel? Is this
w-
about, where you host
okay.
your events? Is this about whether you print a magazine anymore? Like what's the easy low-hanging fruit? Give me something we can solve and do and fix and make everybody happy.
Well, I think your last request might be a tricky one, but I mean there are things you can do. Yeah, absolutely. So you can I mean, we're not we've kind of moved away from adaptation now. We're into mitigation. We're into this
I want
idea
to
of
solve a problem. Yeah, I need to show my members that
sure,
we can we can have some impact as small as it may be and give them small victories along the way
yeah,
until they're either comfortable or
yeah.
assertive enough to want to take it on bigger.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, all of these things you mentioned are good things to do, and it'll be context specific, of course. You know, if you're an organization that is into sales, for instance, and you got a fleet of salesmen or salespeople driving around the country, then thinking about that travel is something that's probably going to be quite impactful. If you're a logistics company, you got a haulage company, you're driving trucks all over the place, that's an area that you're going to want to think about. If you're a services company, maybe you're a consultant or you're or something else, then of course you haven't got so many of those kinds of impacts. So maybe printing is something that you might think about. You know, so all of those things are relevant. And it would be very easy for an association in a given sector to look at the typical activities that their membership are involved in and say, actually, do you know what? It's probably the case that travel is your thing, business travel is your thing. Think about reducing that, or waste is your thing, or water consumption is your thing, or whatever it is. Those are the things you can focus on. And all of those kind of things, in many cases, they're technical fixes. So you need to install some more efficient kit, or change from one type of fuel to another type of fuel, or they're corporate fixes where you kind of a new policy would tick the box. So definitely there is definitely stuff you can do, but the thing that I often come back to when I'm talking about climate change and think about how to get it on the radar of the board is it's really about risk. And in any organization, of course, you're always thinking about risk. You always think about whatever the risk might be. And this is no different. It's just a risk,
Yeah.
and it should be treated like any other risk. So it should be on your corporate risk register, like whatever else is on there. And one of the challenges always, of course, is that the impacts of those risks are seen as being a bit further away. And that's the
Right.
thing. But actually, I mean, it's not true. I mean, you only have to look at some of the events in the US just recently,
Yeah.
and those kind of climate risks
Yeah.
they are very real, and they are very, very painful for people right now. So
Yeah.
there's no excuse really not to have climate change and those risks on your
And just
corporate risk
adding
register.
it to that list of risks. I like it being there to depoliticize it, to make it
Exactly. It's not a
something
political
that's a
issue. It's
part
just
of
a risk issue.
it's just a risk issue,
Yep.
and it's a dedication of resources, because whether we buy insurance or we adopt some adaptations or mitigation, doing things differently can often cost money in different ways. But it can only be more expensive if we wait. It can, or we don't take certain steps.
Exactly. And that's often the thing that we wrestle with in practitioners in this space often wrestle with, because almost every decision in business comes down to, at some point, a
How much
quantification in
does it
terms of money,
cost?
right? Exactly. And it's often really difficult to
Yeah,
quantify some of the cost impacts associated with the potential of some
yeah,
future climate event.
yeah.
But you can start to kind of take this stuff in bite size pieces and deal with one thing at a time. Um, so yeah, that's what I would say. Get it on the risk register. Don't make it political. It's nothing to do with
Yeah.
politics. It's just about, am I likely to get flooded or not? Am I likely to be,
Right.
in the path of a wildfire? Am I likely to get hit by a hurricane? This
Right.
is nothing to do with politics.
Right. Is our convention likely to be canceled? Is our,
Exactly.
there
Exactly.
are real impacts on organizations, and
Yep.
our
Yep.
hearts go out to those in Southern California. I'm from California. I know between
Uh-huh.
earthquakes and droughts and fires, it's not a lessening threat. So I just hope people will find a way to make it and keep it as part of the conversation, and
Yeah,
find a way.
absolutely.
As an
Absolutely.
association, you may not be driving the conversation of your industry, of your sector, but as an association, there are still ways that you can address it, and maybe most importantly, give a safe place, give a collaborative community the opportunity to
Sh-
discuss it.
That's true, of course, but associations sit at that intersection between industry and policy, don't they? Or they can do if they position
Mhm.
themselves there. So they can absolutely have an influence. They can speak on behalf of their membership and be quite influential. That's another thing I think they should definitely be doing. They should definitely be influencing and trying to um, lobby, if you want to kind of be as direct as that, lobby policymakers to persuade both policymakers and their members to take action.
So understanding the perspective of and position of your members,
Exactly.
building consensus around that within your own membership,
Yep.
and then being able to speak to it as the voice of
Right.
your industry, your sector.
Exactly, exactly. And if all else fails, if you're not quite sure what to tackle, what to do, you can always go back to the good old United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There's like 17 goals and 169 targets that sit below them. So it's a rich hunting ground if you're looking for something that you want to something that's relevant for your particular sector that your members sit
Okay.
in
All right.
and
So
what's
there's some
relevant to
low
them.
hanging fruit, some way
There's
you can be
Oh yeah,
working towards something. Well, I hope we don't
absolutely.
have to wait until November to chat with you again. And I'll give Andrew your best.
Yes, thank you.
Well, maybe you give him my best. I don't know. You guys are podcasting all the time now.
Oh
So
yeah, we're never off a podcast, me and Andrew.
well, Kev, I so appreciate you you joining me and you maybe stepping back a little bit from your conversations with Andrew and giving more the entry level conversation around net zero and climate change adaptation and it's important at every level, and I hope we can help make people more well spoken at whatever level they
Yeah.
are and whatever their members expect of them. So until next time, put your members and your mission first.